Okay, so last time we talked about Iron Man. So this time I wanted to actually take some time to focus on the Incredible Hulk and his unfortunate one film. Yeah. So to start things off, one of the things that I wanted to cover was like how Marvel has like a complete understanding of who the character is before they do any script, before they do any filming. They know who the character that they're telling a story about is. And for the Incredible Hulk's case, it's Bruce Banner, who is unfortunately a byproduct of, you find out as you're watching the film, and it's so subliminal, but he's a byproduct of S.H.I.E.L.D. experimenting with trying to revive the super soldier program and weaponizing it. And for the audience at this time in 2008, a few months after Iron Man, you get a glimpse of the super soldier program, but for the mainstream audience, nobody knows who that is. But that was the big driving
the first
force of the plot, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But understanding who Bruce Banner was essential for pulling off this film, which wasn't a critical success like in the box office, but yeah, I don't even recall if it made profit or not. I'd have to look that up. Probably should have before we started recording.
Right.
But aside from that, they had an understanding of who Bruce Banner was. And Bruce Banner is a character who essentially did not or does not like the Hulk when we first meet him. He is essentially running for his life, on the run from what the montage shows us is the General. And you don't find out until later on in the film that the General wants to weaponize the Hulk, which, makes perfect sense if you pay attention to the small details, because he is essentially, like the General said, a byproduct of their experiments.
Yeah, exactly.
That they financed. He was, in fact, working under the General, where Banner took it upon himself to test this experiment on himself.
Right. By the way, the box office, they made back double the
Oh, so it was still profitable.
Yeah. Just, it was 150 mil and
just not critically acclaimed like Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's and for all intents and purposes, they still follow the same formula that they followed for Iron Man. It's just Iron Man tend to be a little bit more of a popular character for the audience, because he wanted to be, at the end of that, he wanted to be like Iron Man. And you kind of get a glimpse of that at the end of Hulk too, that he wants to be Hulk. Ooh, excuse me. But you don't. Unfortunately, there's no other movies to shine on that. And
we're referencing the end scene where he's meditating and trying to get his heartbeat to that famous scene in Avengers where he's always angry.
Yeah. And you find out when the next time we actually see him, which is in Avengers, that the key to his transformations is him just being angry, or dying, as we saw when he
hit the pavement in this movie and.
Hit the pavement in Harlem in the middle of his movie in Incredible Hulk, and then also hit the Rainbow Bridge and broke his neck in Thor Ragnarok.
He broke his body. He was barely disfigured.
Barely. So with knowing who Banner is this person who is a scientist. Mm-hmm. And you find out through the smallest Easter eggs that he's actually one of the most renowned scientists in the world. Outside of them saying that he's a top in the field of gamma study.
Yeah, gamma radiation and stuff.
But he's held up there with Einstein, apparently, as we see in Spider-Man Far From Home. It's the smallest Easter egg right above the student board, the whiteboard in Peter's classroom. You actually see his face right next to Einstein. It's funny because it is Ed Norton. It's actually Mark Ruffalo who ends up replacing him. And, I believe that was for the better because, see, one of the biggest things about the Hulk in the comics and something that you see a lot of in this film is that Banner does not like the Hulk. Right. He does not desire to be the Hulk, and he does everything in his waking power to get rid of him. Exactly. And the Hulk doesn't like that. But then in this film, you see him through the majority of the film essentially trying to get rid of the Hulk, but then realizes, well, no, maybe the Hulk can actually be helpful. Yeah. Because if things like this are out there, then maybe the Hulk does need to be around. And then that's when he tries to fight Abomination in Harlem. And we were having a conversation yesterday about this, about how the Hulk probably lets him get killed. Yeah, right, exactly. Because he doesn't like being used.
Yeah, and when you watch Thor Ragnarok, you get the whole gist of why, Hulk doesn't want to go back to Banner is because he's tired of being used. He's tired of being used as a tool and whatever. And it's really funny that in this movie and in Ragnarok, before Banner transforms into the Hulk, he usually ends up hitting something and dying. So
yeah, and it's interesting because this film does a lot of showing versus telling. Yeah. Where they did a lot less showing in Iron Man, and not to say that they told, because they did show a lot, but comparatively speaking, you have S.H.I.E.L.D. working in the background, and most watchers aren't really the wiser that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been not only keeping tabs on everything that's been happening in Incredible Hulk, but as well as they fronted the whole experiment that created the Hulk.
Yeah, exactly.
In their search for when they then later that week found Captain America.
Curious Big Week once again.
Right. So
yeah, rewatching this movie, it's so jarring on how much S.H.I.E.L.D. had a hand in it.
Yeah.
It's like they're entering S.H.I.E.L.D. databases for Mr. Green and Mr. Blue, and it's crazy. And it's like
even the team that the general uses is, even though on the surface they look military, they were on a S.H.I.E.L.D. op. Yeah. Why? Because the general worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. at that time. And at that time it was above his pay grade to know what S.H.I.E.L.D. was.
Yeah.
And hence, again, the benefit, like last week, how we were talking, knowing the difference between what your characters know and what your audience knows. And the key thing about Nick Fury is that he knows everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're using that to this.
He has to know everything.
Yeah, exactly. He is the spy of spies. And he's kind of using that to, his advantage. Mm-hmm. But Banner as a character kind of has a small little metamorphosis. His little solution, just like we had spoke about how last week, how Marvel tends to tends to kind of get this TV act going as a solution, and the solution is usually them donning their superhero identity. Exactly. And in this case, it's Banner deciding to jump out of a helicopter that's hundreds of feet above Harlem to fight Abomination.
Paying the Hulk towards Abomination.
And you find out, the interesting thing though is that you find out as the Hulk's metamorphosis continues, the Hulk does not like this. The Hulk is its own separate being, but it's also a part of Banner. So much a part of him that it's like his antibodies. And this is shown in the scene at the beginning of Incredible Hulk. When he's
the attempted cure scene.
Yeah, the attempt at his cure scene before he has to come to America.
Yeah, he was playing with blood cells, and the blood cells are initially green, and then they turn back to normal red blood cells, and then it's like the blood cells were angry.
They went. What it was they went from normal red blood cells. He applied the cure, and they turned green, and volatile broke the glass of the microscope.
Yeah.
Showing that he would have raged out if he had applied the full dosage of that cure. But so onto the next thing, and one of the difficulties that even Kevin Feige said when it comes to Hulk movies, outside of the business aspects, why it's probably difficult to do a Hulk solo film, is the flaws of a powerhouse. You have to have even more powerhouses to challenge him, and it's like, when it's a powerhouse, how do you challenge him in character? And it's like, in the comics, Hulk didn't have character, so they did the smartest thing possible. They spent their time, instead of dedicating movies, since they couldn't really dedicate movies because of a certain studio, they spent their time more so focusing on the character of Banner and coming to terms with being the Hulk.
Yeah.
In Thor Ragnarok, he has fears. They throw a new fear or a new flaw onto him, and that's fear. This fear aspect again, and it is fear of him not turning back to Banner if he turned into Hulk again.
One last time. Yeah, because like 2 years was the longest. In Ragnarok, we find out that he was Hulk for 2 years, and that was the longest that he's ever been Hulk.
Yep.
You know what I mean? To the point where Hulk just blossomed, became this whole... I mean, he was already his own character, but now he's speaking in at least talkable sentences. You know, he's able to hold a conversation. He's able to make friendship. Like, he has friends. You know, his friendship with Valkyrie and stuff like that. And yeah, so
yeah, and this is kind of like the struggle I think you have with characters like Superman, who, for all intents and purposes in the comics, he's a flawless character.
Right.
You go to Superman for answers. Superman doesn't look for them, because he has them all, kind of thing. And this is like the second thing is, like, you only throw a powerhouse at him. That's probably why his rebooted film, which I don't know what's going to happen with that whole area of the franchise in that sense, but
they're pretty much up in there.
In Man of Steel, he fights
General
Zod and his entire crew, and the question is, it's like, where do you go from there? He fought Doomsday. Where do you go from there? It's like you're throwing all these powerhouses, and he's not having. Yeah, he fought Steppenwolf, and there was
really a fight, though. I mean, he kind of beat Steppenwolf.
He did.
It wasn't really
But it's like, now he's fighting gods, and it's like, where do you go from there? And it's like, there was no metamorphosis of actual character. Yeah. He just kind of popped up all super optimistic after he died.
Yeah.
I think
the best villains are the villains that's able to challenge him on like a spiritual basis, if that makes sense. Like the people that can challenge him. Mentally,
and it's like,
they can question the things that.
Yeah, like, you know, in Darkseid is a great villain to use in that example, but not directly. Darkseid knows how to work indirectly, and that's where where I would personally, like, you know, take advantage of that.
Right.
Have him work through his minions. He has tons of, like, you know, different minions, and this is where you can explore the new gods, and this is where you would essentially start off first with the new gods. But that's off topic.
Yeah, back on original topic.
With the Hulk, one of the issues is that you can't. Marvel has, at the time, had very limited access to his roster, as well as possible characters that can challenge him. So the only best possible way is you develop a character so that when the last time or the next time we see Hulk, the chances of him being the greatest possible incarnation of him is possible. Yeah. Which is why, like, you know, we see him speaking even more in Avengers. We get even more shots of him in light. in Avengers because he's more as a character has more.
The first Avengers, right?
Yeah. He's evolved more with not really caring who sees him. Mm-hmm. It's more of stay out of my way or get ran over. Why? Because Banner's angry. And this is supported with his statement saying that he's always angry. He's angry that he has a Hulk in him. He's angry that at himself, he's angry that he couldn't get the love of his life, which was Betty, that we see him leave behind in Incredible Hulk. True. And you had mentioned that...
And never contacted him?
Yeah, like you had mentioned...
For under a decade?
Off recording. And you know, the thing about this is what I wanted to bring up. A key thing about the Incredible Hulk that I realized while watching his movie that we see his recurring theme is that he, outside of his self-control issues or his Jekyll and Hyde theme, he's a very complex character. There's a recurring theme of avoidance. He's always constantly trying to avoid. And, you know, quite frankly, in Endgame, he's not necessarily given the opportunity after bringing everybody back to approach Betty.
Right.